Well, hello, and a very happy Pentecost to everyone that is celebrating this very holy and special day today. I am so happy to be reaching out to everyone on a new format for our teacher talk. This is our 10th episode, which is kind of surreal to be thinking about. We started this 10 weeks ago, but I wanted to hear from all of you, the people that have been listening each week and providing comments and questions. I'm so grateful for your engagement. I wanted to know what you're interested in talking about in terms of arts and education. I'll be giving you some of my own thoughts, but I want you to feel free to post comments and questions, and I'd like to talk to you today. No particular guests to speak with. This is about what your thoughts are. I've been advertising it this week. I hope to get some engagement. If not, I've got plenty of things to share that I've been thinking about, especially in light of all the extraordinary things that are happening in our country right now. As is the tradition, I'd like to start with a moment of a prayer, but for those of you that might not be familiar with this format or what this is meant to do, this is Teacher Talks. It's a weekly opportunity for me to engage with others on conversations of art and education, particularly in the United States. My name is Christopher Hansen. I am very honored to serve at Seattle Pacific University as the Director of Music Education and Orchestral Activities. I just moved up to Seattle from Central Texas. I was born and raised in Texas, so I'm learning a lot about the Pacific Northwest in terms of culture and education and politics, and really enjoying the time that I have to serve at Seattle Pacific University and in the state of Washington. It's a unique opportunity to be coming from another state and bringing those perspectives and experiences and being in what I consider a really amazing environment in Seattle and in the state of Washington to be talking about art and education and possibilities. I've just been so grateful to be up here, particularly in light of the global pandemic and ways that we're having to reimagine art and education. And most recently, as is kind of difficult to talk about, the crimes that were committed against George Floyd and the protests that are happening all over the country. As if things were not extraordinary enough, as if what we were going through was not harmful and painful enough with, social distancing practices and the deaths associated with the COVID-19 virus. Now the horrid atrocity of the racial discrimination and prejudice and crimes that exist in our country are at the forefront of media and politics and our social interactions. And it's difficult to talk about. It's difficult to think about because it's affecting all of us, people that we know and love, and individuals that might even be watching right now. So I plan on starting a conversation there because it is pressing on my mind and my heart very heavily. But before we get into conversation, a brief moment of prayer. Lord, thank you. Thank you again and again for the resources that you provide us to stay connected as we practice social distancing appropriately to protect ourselves in terms of our physical health. I pray that you bring us closer together in terms of our spiritual, mental, and intellectual health. I pray that we stay connected and that we continue to have conversations around equity and inclusion and opportunity for those that do not have access, for those that do not have a voice. God, I pray that we find ways to magnify them and celebrate them through the arts and through education. Thank you for this time. Thank you for the people that will listen, and thank you for the people that will pose questions and join this conversation, one of many that are happening all over the world. Thank you for this day of Pentecost. Thank you for everyone that is celebrating. I pray for peace and discernment and joy for those that can find it in the daily routine and the daily comforts that they have in their lives. Help us to come together, Lord. In your most holy and precious name, amen. So, for all of you that are watching, hello to several of my friends, to Courtney and Francesca Klima. It's great to see you, one of my friends all the way from Alief, Texas. It's just great to interact with so many of you. Ilyana and Zachary, it's so great to see you. If you all have any questions or comments, I would love to be speaking with all of you that are watching. For those that are just tuning in, we're doing a different format today for our 10th episode in celebration to making making it to a 2-digit number, I thought it would be nice to talk to all of you. There are no particular guests today. It's an opportunity for us to have a conversation. I've already mentioned for some of you that are just tuning in that in light of everything that's happening in the world, particularly the response that's happening to the crimes against George Floyd and his murder, it's been weighing very heavy on my heart what art and education can do in response. Myself as a teacher of teachers, what does this look like for my students that I'm preparing to go into schools? And I had a powerful interaction with someone on Facebook with a post that I made calling teachers to do a better job of educating others in what is happening. And I felt bad because the post had seemed sort of confrontational to the person that read it, and it really was not my point. They said, teachers get blamed for too much, and I feel very overwhelmed by teachers getting called out. And I really do respect that. I mean, teachers can be blamed in many regards to issues that we're facing in society writ large. Teachers do fall on their sword quite a bit, and it definitely wasn't the intention of the post. And I hope that the conversation we had through social media did what I wanted it to do, and that was to show that teachers have the opportunity to do more, that we should be educating young children on realities that we're facing and not sugarcoating it or not keeping them from it, because they are things that they are living through and that they're going to deal with as they mature into their adult life. And I thought it was a powerful post, and I've kept it up. And I posted even today, that I'm an educator that stands with the Black Lives Matters movement. I'm an educator that believes in equality and access to education and thought, and that we should not be censoring our students from what they're feeling and what they're thinking. And I want people to know that this doesn't come from out of nowhere. It's based off of my own experiences, feeling a sense of liberation through my own education, being a first-generation college student and growing up on the southwest side of Houston. I've had very unique and powerful experiences in my life that have given me the perception that I have on what education can and should be doing. One of the people that I attribute a lot of my thinking to is the educational philosopher and arts activist Maxine Greene. Anyone that speaks to me for more than 5 minutes probably hears me quote Maxine Greene, or hears me employ a lot of her own thoughts, because she's such a powerful thinker, such a powerful force in terms of the power of art and education. And so I thought I would start sort of speaking about some of these things with a book that I've been rereading by Maxine Greene called Releasing the Imagination. Let's see if I can get it in the shot. An incredible work, a part of several books that she wrote in her life. And I had the extraordinary privilege of reading this book with one of my students at Seattle Pacific University. We did an independent study together, and we read chapters from this book. And it's been amazing to reread it. If you're not familiar with Maxine Greene's work, it's just an amazing book, and provides really powerful challenges for the way we think about art and education. So in light of some of the posts that I've put up about teachers having sort of a responsibility and opportunity to educate students on what is happening, the realities of what's happening, good and bad, and the power of arts to be able to support children to imagine a future that is better than the reality that we're living through right now, I went back to this book, a conversation that I had with the student that I'm doing the independent study with. And for those that are familiar with it, this is the 9th chapter. It's called Teaching for Openings, which is a big part of Maxine Greene's philosophy, is trying to find these cracks, these crevices in established traditions and norms and what we inherit in terms of our ways of thinking and knowing, and finding those cracks and getting into them and finding opportunities to see past where we are right now. And so I'm just going to read a few of these paragraphs that I think are pertinent. She says, I'm tempted, you see, to remain with what Michael Foucault elsewhere calls the established order of things, pedagogical things, liberal education things. I am drawn to affirm the timelessness of what I have come to love over the years, of what I choose to think of as the very source of myself, allowing myself to be carried along by the great conversation initiated by others, and indeed maintained by others. I would not have to disrupt. I would not have to begin anything. I would need only be swept along by what the great ones have said and remain partially submerged in them. But when I think of how much beginnings have to do with freedom, how much disruption has to do with consciousness and the awareness of possibility that has so much to do with teaching other human beings. And I think that if I and other teachers truly want to provoke our students to break through the limits of the conventional and the taken for granted, we ourselves have to experience breaks with what has been established in our own lives. We have to keep arousing ourselves to begin again. And I'm jumping down a little bit. She says, I must recognize, however, how hard it has been to confront the controls, the principles of exclusion and denial that have allowed me a certain range of utterances and prevented others. I have not easily come to terms with the ways in which education, too often following the lines of class, gender, and race, permits and forbids the expression of different people's experiences. I say the words, but find it hard not to evade the implications of what most of us acknowledge by now, that every educational system is a political means of maintaining or of modifying the appropriation of discourse, with the knowledge and powers it carries with it. Many of the alienated or marginalized are made to feel distrustful of their own voices, their own ways of making sense, yet they are not provided alternatives that allow them to tell their stories or shape their narratives or ground new learning in what they already know. No great heroism or self-sacrifice is asked of us who view ourselves as ordinary people, but we do have the capacity to refuse and to strive in this way, and to do so by seeing clearly through our own eyes and speaking clearly in our own voices. So this is really powerful to me because, particularly as a white cisgender male, I recognize that I have a lot of social and cultural privilege. I have a lot of professional privileges. And I recognize that. And I, like I said, I was rereading this with my student, and Maxine Green even recognizes it. She says, there are a lot of things that I think need to be challenged in the professional and educational worlds, but I would be foolish not to recognize by challenging those things, I'm going to dismantle some systems that have put me in the place that I am in. And Maxine Green was honored and privileged to be serving at Columbia's Teachers College, and she recognized that she was in this fantastic place that she had worked hard to get into. But in being in that space, it honored several systems that marginalized others and put her into that position and kept her in that position. And I've been confronted by that several times over the past few weeks. There are things that I think need to be challenged and reimagined and rethought of, restructured. And in doing so, it will dismantle things that have helped me achieve the things that I am proud of in my life, that have put me in a position to be an educator of educators. That's hard to deal with. I'm so grateful, so blessed to be in the position that I'm in right now. But I have to look past where I am. I have to look past the opportunities and privileges that I've been given to be able to see others, and more importantly, let others' experiences and voices be heard, especially as an educator, particularly for educators that are serving in public schools. There are other opinions, there are other realities, there are other experiences than what we have learned and what we own and what we bring into our classroom. The textbooks that we're using, the repertoire that we're choosing, that is someone else's voice, and it's valid, and it's important for our students to experience it, but we have to contextualize it. I reference the idea of hermeneutics, big fancy term that we borrow from theological scholarship to contextualize the things that we read, to understand where they're coming from, that they didn't just mature or materialize out of nowhere, that they have historical and cultural context. And we need to appreciate that to understand the words that we're reading, rather than just taking them as truth. Even in music, I've been confronted by this often, that for most classrooms in the United States, we teach from a Western European musical heritage, which is great. I mean, it really is the foundation of music in America in terms of Western European musical traditions, major and minor keys, and primary chords, right? Traditional tonal function and non-harmonic tones. And like, this is what we've inherited from our European forefathers, artistic forefathers. It absolutely makes sense. But there are other ways of making music. There are other styles. There are other forms of tonality. There are modalities that are still utilized around the world. There are other purposes for music rather than just entertainment. And I think that we need to talk about those things. And when we present students with music, we should present it in such a way that they can appreciate this is one way of doing music. This is one way of understanding music, rather than this is the way that we make music. Too often, I think that we put our students in a position of being right and wrong, right? There are certain elements, I should say variables in music that do live in, polarities, intonation, right? I mean, I think, yes, we could say it is an F sharp or it's not an F sharp. That is a B flat or it's not a B flat. It could be in tune or out of tune. Dynamics, it's either loud or it's soft, and there's a spectrum of dynamics. But if it's written on the page that it needs to be forte, then you should expect a certain volume from your students. There are certain things like that are polarized that we could appreciate. But in terms of why we're making music and how we're making music and when we're making music and the purposes that it serves, I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to explore that and appreciate that, as opposed to teaching one way of knowing music and one way of doing music. We're doing a huge disservice to our students by perpetuating what it is that we've experienced or inherited as the only way of understanding things. And I would argue, without being presumptuous, that it's the reason that we find ourselves in so many uncomfortable and unfortunate situations that we're in, is we've inherited a way of thinking and understanding the world that we perpetuate. And we don't allow ourselves to move past what it is that we've inherited. We don't allow ourselves to invite other opinions and experiences and perceptions, and then wrestle with that and understand where the conflicts are, and appreciate that there could be more than one perspective, that there should be, in certain regards, more than one perspective. I was always frustrated with how, even I can recall, my elementary school days, that we were taught sort of what good music was. Like, well, this is Mozart and he's a great composer. So that's not to say that Mozart's not a great composer, but there are a lot of other composers. And if that is your experience, if that's what you're being taught, that is ultimately what you're going to know and understand the world to be. And so why could we not introduce more composers of color, or more composers with various gender identities, right? I mean, why can't we do that? Why does it have to start with Western European models of success and of Western European models of music? There are other ways of doing it. I mean, arguably, it's a reality because there are other, countries, there are other musics outside of Europe, outside of America. And so to deny those from the beginning of a student's education, I think, does a huge disservice, because it ignores the plurality of where we are in our lives. Technology has done an extraordinary job of bringing us together in a way that's unprecedented in our world's history. And in light of that, we have to recognize how connected we are and how accessible all of these alternative realities, if you will, are, or alternative experiences are. Why are we not bringing that into the classroom more? It's so good to see people, Lynette and Jordan and Hillary and Laura and Sean, for all of you. James Flowers, it's great to see you, sir. Sean Lewis, a very good friend of mine. It's great to see you, sir. If you guys are still listening, please post questions, post comments. I would love your feedback. This is definitely not meant to be an opportunity for me to go on a rant. I've been talking for quite a while. I would love to hear from you, those of you that are listening. What are your thoughts? What do you think? I want to talk to you. I want to know what you're thinking. And I've shared some of Maxine Green's words. I've shared some of my own, but what are your thoughts right now? What is your opinion of teachers' responsibilities to be able to educate students right now, and the opportunities that exist in the music classroom or the art classroom in general? Hello to Valerie, one of my former students, and Janelle, a colleague of mine. It's great to see all of you listening, but Please post comments. Let me know what you're thinking, because today's Teacher Talk is really meant to be a conversation with all of you that have been tuning in and supporting these opportunities for us to connect. I don't want this to just be about my own thoughts. It speaks really counterintuitive to what I've already been talking about, that we shouldn't have one perspective. So please let me know what you're thinking. And nothing is off limits. You can ask about my own personal journey in education, how I'm serving right now as a teacher of teachers. Whatever it is that you're curious about, I'm happy to answer questions that are directly towards me, or for us to simply talk about some of the larger things that are going on and how the arts and education can respond. I don't see any questions or comments just yet. I am definitely eager to entertain them, but I'd love to return to Maxine Greene. And there's another quote I think that's really powerful in terms of why imagination and imagination realized through art education is so significant. She says, to call for imaginative capacity is to work for the ability to look at things as if they could be otherwise. To ask for intensified realization is to see that each person's reality must be understood to be interpreted experience, and that the mode of interpretation depends on his or her situation and location in the world. It depends as well on the number of vantage points a person is able or enabled to take, the number of perspectives that will disclose multiple aspects of a contingent, not a self-existent world. To tap into imagination is to become able to break with what is supposedly fixed and finished, objectively and independently real. It is to see beyond what the imaginer has called normal or commonsensible, and to carve out new orders in experience. Doing so, a person may become freed to glimpse what might be, to form notions of what should be and what is not yet. And the same person may, at the same time, remain in touch with what presumably is. This is one of my favorite quotes by Maxine Greene in terms of in sort of releasing the imagination. That comes from the title of the book, and the significance of inviting particularly students in an educational setting to see past where they are, right? To see past where they are. Klima, it's great to see you. And I want to address this, explain some of the other ways to make music besides the Western European methods. Absolutely. So world music in general, I see Amy Santos, great music educator in Central Texas, and several of you probably have comments for this, but world music in general, I think, is something that we need to be experimenting more with, creating units, depending on what level you're teaching at. If you're at the primary school level, obviously your engagement with students looks really different because you might only be working with them 20 to 40 minutes once a week. They're organized by grade level. Once you're at the secondary level, you're working in middle school and high school, you're going to see your students more frequently. But let me talk about the secondary level. That's where my career in public schooling was, so I'm a little more comfortable with that. But this really boils down to programming. What does your programming look like? I actually had a really valuable conversation with someone who I consider a mentor and an incredible member in the field of music education. I want to protect anonymity just in case this was something he didn't want to share publicly, but he gave me a really incredible perspective on publishing and what sells and what is needed. And so follow me. I promise I'm addressing this question, but we got into this conversation about, publishers will publish what ends up selling. And so it exposed sort of this flawed system in which, what sells is what publishers are willing to offer. But publishers are only willing to offer what sells. And it's dominated right now by Western European composers, the quote unquote masters. And I only put it in quotes because I feel like there are master composers outside of the Western European canon. So in other words, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, these are the composers that sell. But I sort of challenged them and said, well, they're the composers that are selling because they are the composers that the publishers are providing. So is there really not a market for other composers, or are the publishers not actually providing that in order for them to sell and then see the demand for it? So I think you can see there's this weird, not even necessarily a contradiction, it's this paradox of like, How and when can we change that? Well, the need has to be met, and the need has to be created in a lot of regards. So when you're programming, instead of just looking at published materials, can you consider teaching things by rote? Can you bring in some folk songs, pentatonic melodies from Eastern culture, from African culture, that are arguably very accessible, very easy to teach by rote, to explore improvisation, and what certain forms, usually folk traditional forms, lend towards instrumental expression. Things that might be sung can easily be translated into instruments. There are so many folk melodies, particularly in the Kodály and Orff curriculum, that most of us as music educators have to study in some sort of a general music methods course, but that could easily be translated into instruments, and then giving it sort of historical and cultural significance, which is a part of our national core art standards and a lot of state standards. Leaning into that and introducing that to students can be incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful pedagogical tool and musical experience for students. So at the secondary level, I think it all deals with programming. And at the general music, or not general music level, because that can happen at any grade level, but at the elementary school level in grades pre-K through 5, it does have to do with programming, but if we look at programming more in terms of curricular development. Great to see Kay Van Landingham. So good to see you. And for those that are just tuning in, we're talking about Kalima's question, explaining some of the other ways that we can make music besides Western European methods. And I really think, again, there are so many opportunities. We've talked about what's available in terms of programming at the secondary level, and I should say what's available from my perspective. There are lots of other models. But when we look at elementary school education, doing a better job of exploring world music, there is a part of the National Core Arts Standards, a part of the curriculum development for elementary education is promoting national music, particularly American music, American folk songs and patriotic music, which is fantastic, but it can tend to dominate the curriculum. And the importance of nationalistic music is tied to cultural heritage. And so recognizing the plurality of cultures and ethnicities in our classroom can naturally invite conversations about pluralistic ways of understanding music and culture and heritage and other cultures that are represented, and appropriate ways of doing that and bringing that into your classroom. We have several, we're in May right now, which is National Asian American Heritage Month in the United States. We know February to be Black History Month. There's an Hispanic Heritage Month. There are all kinds of already sort of national designations of when certain cultures and heritages can be celebrated. And I think we could do more to take advantage of that. If you are in a position where you need to justify some of those choices, which I think hints at some underlying political or bureaucratic issues that maybe need to be dealt with, because if you're having to justify programming and utilizing music from non-Western European methods or models, I think, again, that might be a bigger issue to tackle. But I digress. If you're looking for a reason, I think it's very easy to say, hey, we're in May. It's Asian American Heritage Month. Let's explore the music of Asia, which is so insanely diverse. When we're thinking about, Asia as this continent and like what that means. I mean, there's just so much music of Asia. And so being able to bring that into your classroom, and it doesn't have to be facilitated through a concert. I think that's where people might feel overwhelmed, is trying to organize this huge thing. It's about experiences. I'm gonna hearken to what Maxine Green writes about, and she's a huge supporter of John Dewey, and everybody are probably familiar with John Dewey and some of your studies in the School of Education. He wrote a fantastic book called Art as Experience, and he's all about experiential models of learning. And so when we look at things like that and providing experiences, just inviting your students to experience that music, just allowing them to experience it in your classroom. It might just be a part of a warm-up, but just spending 5 minutes, it doesn't even have to be that, 3 minutes of introducing them to something and giving them some context. That's all that it takes, because then they just recognize that there are other forms of music. There are other possibilities. I don't even know that it has to be that explicit. Even at a young age, students will recognize we're doing something that sounds and feels different in terms of my experience with it. And so now I know that there's other types of music, something else exists, rather than just what you're giving me, which again, based on published curriculum, is usually dominated by Western European traditions. And I say traditions because it could even be American folk music, but it's still dominated with the types of harmonies and melodic contour that we're used to seeing based on what we've inherited from European music history. So Kalima, I don't know if that is exactly what you were looking for. I would love for another post or comment if you're looking for more or for less. But for others that are just joining, for those that have been staying with this the whole time, I'm sorry for the redundancy, but for those that are joining, I'm intentionally shaking up to celebrate 2 digits. We made it to our 10th teacher talk. And today I really want to talk to you. I want to know what you're thinking. This is an extraordinary time that we're living through, not only with the pandemic, but with the murder of George Floyd and the protests that are happening all over the country. This is a time for us to think very intentionally about the education of young people and what that means. I started by referencing a post that I shared, and I've shared several posts in this same vein, that teachers and educators, I think, have a unique responsibility and a call to be educating our students at this time and knowing what that means. Daniel, great to see you, sir. Let me read this. It says, regarding music education in middle and high school for the near future, how do we continue to engage with students and give them opportunities for music making and enriching overall musicianship when it's very likely that bands and orchestras and choirs will not meet in full capacity in the near future, or even worst case scenario, music education being cut entirely? Lord, I'm going to try to control my emotions, because this is a terrifying reality right now. We're seeing it in the state of Washington, especially in more rural areas. They are canceling extracurricular activities, which is one component of a fine arts and performing arts education, but they're also just making cuts in general because administrators are appropriately frustrated and not able to imagine what art education could look like if they're not having physical contact with each other. What does band, choir, and orchestra, or theater and visual arts for that matter, what does that look like if students aren't gathering together in ensembles or in cohorts to do their work? Most of our curriculum is project-based, and so project-based learning does require collaboration, and it's usually done in person. So, how do we navigate that? That's definitely the question of the hour. I do have ideas. I'm definitely not avoiding the question. I have lots of ideas. And I want everybody to know that my ideas are based off of practical experience. In other words, I've tried to be very intentional about what my plans are and what I could execute, and then what I would suggest to the students that are graduating going into the field. Again, for those that might not know, I'm now the director of music education at Seattle Pacific University. So I'm teaching teachers, and I am incredibly sensitive to what it is that they're going into. No one has ever had to go into the field with the risk of not being able to meet your students. And having completed a 4-year degree plan that promoted and supported and educated you to teach in a very formal way, in a traditional structure, which we can now call a traditional structure because it's been challenged. And we don't have books. We don't have scholarship right now on what you're supposed to do in the classroom. So I just want to recognize the struggle that we're all facing. It is humbling, to say the least, and I think it has the opportunity to unify us and challenge us to be imaginative and look at our engagement in the music classroom in a new way. For those that are familiar with the National Core Art Standards, I know it's different in every state, but all of us have these art strands which are fed by the NAFME standards, particularly in music, but in all arts by the National Core Art Standards. And I'm actually stealing this from a colleague that was talking about this in a Washington Music Educators Association board meeting we had yesterday. So one aspect of our curriculum is performing, one aspect. And again, depending on your state and what your standards look like, the National Core Art Standards promote 4 areas. And we look at creating, and we look at performing, and we look at our perceptions, and we look at cultural heritage and cultural significance. Performing is just one part of it. And so as much as, and please appreciate where this is coming from, I'm an orchestra director. I currently conduct an orchestra at Seattle Pacific University. I have skin in the game. This is not me looking objectively as some scholar from a university. I have an ensemble that I am supposed to engage with, a performing ensemble. I absolutely appreciate that this is the model that we are used to. It's the model that we have inherited. It is centuries old. It is not able to be replaced by technology. You can't. The ability to connect with other human beings in real time in the same space and make music together cannot be replaced by technology. That needs to be set up front. But going back to the point that I'm bringing up, that performance is one aspect of our standards. It is one thing that we're supposed to do. We have become so product focused and product driven in terms of getting to performance in the general, and I'm using this in the broad term, the general music curriculum, band, choir, orchestra, general music, wherever you are, we've become so consumed with performance being the product of what we do that we've lost sight that there are a lot of other experiences and things to learn in our classroom. So to answer directly to Daniel's question, I think we need to explore some of those other things. We have to be careful because depending on what your standards look like in your state, it's different all over the country. The national core standards are always a great place to start. There are great examples in that. It's published, it's available, it's free. Great examples of what that looks like to engage students through experience and perception, to engage students through cultural heritage and understanding, to engage students through creativity, composition and improvisation and all these other things. There are really fantastic models to do that. There is also an overwhelming amount of resources that are available right now. There's a ton of stuff that's being posted. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. We have to be very conscious consumers. I am personally advocating that people go to their national and state organizations. If you're still in Texas, go to TMEA. Wherever you are in the country, go to your NAFME website. Go to the professional organizations because they have vetted a lot of the resources that are up there. It's not to say that what you're going to find in a blog or in a website or someone's personal website or social media page, it's not to say that that's not valuable, but we have to offer context. Those things are working for those people in a very specific situation. It may or may not work for us. With a lot of the resources that I've seen and the webinars that are being hosted by NAFME and other state organizations, a lot of those things are being vetted. So I think that they have a really important potency to how we could utilize them and how effective they would be. Daniel, I'm actually curious if you wouldn't mind letting me know if you're asking for specific examples, because from the broad perspective, my understanding is that we need to look past performance. We need to see that performance should not be our only goal in the music classroom, whatever the grade level is. We need to look at some of the opportunities that we have for students to listen, for students to analyze, for students to use all those other cognitive verbs that come with teaching. And so that's to me where I am, is that let's look beyond performance. But I'm absolutely happy to share some specific strategies that I've used teaching orchestra at Seattle Pacific University that I think, based off of student feedback, has been relatively effective. And I'm also happy to share some of the things that I've seen working in some classrooms if you're looking for something specific. So please feel free to post, Daniel, if you're still watching. I would love to share some of those strategies. Hello to Danny, my colleague at SPU. It's so great to see you, sir. And Esteban, it's great to see you, sir. I hope you're making some great trumpet sounds in Texas for us. Justin, my former roommate, incredible musician and educator. It's good to see you, sir. And Amy, let me read this question. You say, hi, Chris, I was thinking of this coming year having a cultural fair to include grade level opportunities in art and more, poster presentations, dress up activities, and to have my winter concert, if it happens, to have decorated trees for various countries of the world, and of course, wonderful music from other places. Amy, it's brilliant. You're such a fantastic educator. I'm so great to have known you while I was in San Marcos and at Texas State. I think it's a wonderful idea. I just actually, with my students, I'm teaching a general music methods course, and we've been reading out of this book called Teaching General Music. And there's a really fantastic chapter about adapting interdisciplinary approach in general music by Janet Barrett. And she calls for a lot of these similar activities of starting to look past the music classroom. And this might be a great way to advocate for yourself if you are in the position where your program might get cut or your position will be furloughed. Think about art integration. If they're not going to allow you to facilitate a choir class or band class or whatever the case might be, because they're not sure what that would look like or how you could adequately facilitate it, become a consultant. Say, I need to stay on so that I can integrate arts into all of the other courses. For several of you, in the case of Texas, you're looking at meeting in person in the fall. For a lot of us, that's not a possibility. A lot of states are going to still be doing the distance learning, or they're going to have really strict limitations on the number of students that are in classrooms and be reassigning, teachers to a lot of different areas. So if there is a way that you can advocate for yourself to talk about the significance of art integration and understanding through the arts, not necessarily trying to teach performance or teach performance-oriented skills, but just to have an art mindset and to promote imagination and engagement through the arts. Amy, I think it's an absolutely brilliant activity. I love the idea of multiple trees and how that ties into a lot of the cultural traditions in December, and having some sort of a winter concert. I think is genius. And there's a great opportunity to do that interdisciplinary instruction, the cross-curricular instruction, meeting with some of those grade level teachers, talking about what their social studies plans are going to be and what they're teaching. Project-based learning more than ever is really important right now. More than any other time, I think we need to lean heavily into project-based learning, bringing in different components and showing the students how we can collaborate together on specific topics, ideas. Even further to the point, I remember doing this, and I took pre-AP World History my freshman year in high school, and I remember we had an international fair, something of the sort. We had this small group, and we would pick a country. A lot of you probably remember doing this, and you talk about the GDP and the language and the culture and the geography, and you do all these things. But there, I think, are great opportunities to do that on a whole campus. For some of you that are in administrative roles, why don't you explore the world, so to speak? Have every grade level explore a country, and the art educators can tap into that music. When they're teaching their third graders in that month, or however long it might last, they can explore the music of India, or explore the music of Tanzania, or Egypt, or Israel, and they can start exploring particular cultures, and then develop this great seminar or fair where students would be able to go through. And in terms of social distancing, it would make a great opportunity. You set it up in the cafeteria, you let one grade level in at a time rather than the whole school, so that everybody has access to it, or put it up in the hallways so the kids would see it as they're walking through. Just so many great possibilities. Now more than ever, I hope that administrators and policymakers see the significance of the arts, because now we're having to be creative. We're having to see past what has existed, and we're having to start to look at new possibilities and new ways of engaging students that we've never done before. That's how we're going to thrive. And notice I say thrive, not just survive. I think that's how we're going to be able to celebrate some of the challenges that we faced, because it's going to force us to look at education and the arts in a new way. And once we do that, we're going to experience things that we never would have done otherwise. I feel it appropriate, if Daniel is still listening, to give you an example of something that I did. I will say the sort of ugly V word, as it's become, the virtual ensemble. A lot of people have criticism over this, appropriate criticism, because it's been used and manipulated in different ways to be celebrated or deceive people on the perceived accomplishments or work or achievements of different ensembles. There is a lot of what I consider appropriate controversy around it, on what its pedagogical value is and its significance and the broader perspective of what your students are learning and doing. But all of that being said, I have had a really powerful and great experience with my students at Seattle Pacific University that are in the orchestra. To give a little bit of context, this is a non-major ensemble. So the majority of the students that are in that ensemble are not music majors. It has about 20 string players, usually 20 to 30 string players. And then we employ roughly 15 to 20 wind players when we do a full symphonic repertoire. So in the light of the pandemic and things getting shut down at my own institution, I had to scramble and figure out, how am I going to engage students in an orchestral experience? What is that going to look like? I was inspired by a lot of the virtual ensemble things that I was seeing. This is way back in February when the conversations first started and things started to happen. And so I said, let me lean into it. Let me try it. I'm not going to know what it's like until I experience it, and I can decide for myself whether it's valuable. But I think what is important is I approached the idea of a virtual ensemble not to have a virtual ensemble, but to be able to engage my students in a musical experience. And I think, if I can, without being presumptuous, I think that's where a lot of people went wrong, or where the perceptions are misguided, is that people have been trying to create virtual ensembles with the goal of having a virtual ensemble. They just want to post something. They just want to be seen and heard virtually. That's great. I mean, that has value in and of itself, but I would argue it's not necessarily educational. If you don't structure that experience in a certain way that students are getting feedback, that they're being assessed, and that they're learning, it's not necessarily educational. It can become a gimmick. And again, I'm not speaking to everyone, and this is in no way a condemnation, because I am really a huge supporter of the idea of utilizing virtual ensembles to engage students through the performing arts. But you have to be very careful about how you structure that experience. So for us, I approach it in such a way that there would be an opportunity for assessment, that there would be an opportunity for a very intentional feedback for the students, so that we could track growth, so that we could measure growth. And I know I'm using a lot of those educational buzzwords and jargon, but I think it's important to stay connected to the craft. We are still educators. We're not just music directors and conductors. We need to be educating our students just as much as we're providing these fantastic artistic experiences for them. So long story short, I gave the students repertoire that we were going to use. I created some tracks to guide them through that experience. They submitted their recordings. We had a calendar that they were held to, that they had to submit recordings at a certain time. I was available for private instruction, for individual instruction. So they had these play-along tracks that they were using, but they could connect with me via Zoom. And we could not do it in real time because of latency issues, but they would perform for me. And then I would give them feedback immediately, talk about intonation and bowing and articulations and phrasing. And then they would submit their recordings. Now, to be fair, this took an insane amount of time. But I found ways to make this a little more accessible. But I would listen to each recording and provide written feedback. Imagine how glorious our year could be if we could do that for each student, to give every individual student written feedback. It's seldom a reality in the public school setting because there are all of these other things that we're trying to manage. But since I am not, which was supposed to be a part of our year, I'm not organizing a physical space for concerts and trying to figure out, when the doors open and who's doing stage setup and tear down and what the materials we need and who's moving the percussion equipment. That had been taken off my plate. We weren't traveling. We were supposed to do some traveling in the spring quarter and do some off-campus performances. So I wasn't organizing buses and transportation and meals and schedules, and I wasn't dealing with any of that. So with a lot of the things that had been taken off of my plate, I had more time to focus in on how my students were performing and progressing. And it was really amazing because I would get a first take from them. I would give them written feedback and they would submit a second recording, and I had documented their progress. I mean, to say that I know learning occurred for my orchestra students this quarter at my university, I have evidence to back it up. This is not me just promoting this virtual experience that I provided for them. I can have you listen to 2 recordings that were done about a month apart and show you this is where this student was on their own and this is where they are now, right? I can track that progress and I can show you the written feedback that I've given them. So all of that being said, we then had another opportunity, and this is unique being at the university level, but I don't doubt that there are resources like this on certain campuses. We got to engage all of our sound recording technology majors, our music technology majors at the university. So they're helping us in doing the editing of this recording. A lot of music educators have taken that up on their own, which is extraordinary. That so many of you and I'm speaking for my generation, we had limited music technology experience when we were going through our training because music technology was not what it was 10, 13, 15 years ago when we were, getting our undergraduate degrees and certifications in music. And so now there was this huge learning curve for a lot of educators. And so many of you took on editing and formatting your virtual ensembles on your own, which is amazing. I mean, you should be commended for that. I knew I wouldn't be able to handle that. So I reached out to resources that I had, reached out to professionals in the field that were willing to collaborate with me. And so those students now have an opportunity to be a part of getting these files and mixing them and mastering them, which I think is extraordinary. And I held my students accountable. I bring that up because in some of the groups that I'm in on social media, several posts have been given of, well, this isn't quote unquote real. or somehow this isn't representative of what those students can really do because you've just edited them to make them sound better. Yes, that's possible, but that's not necessarily how the virtual ensembles are being facilitated all over, and it's not necessarily a model that you have to adopt. My students were held accountable to what was on the page, probably for the first time in their orchestral lives, to be honest. I can put myself on the chopping block and say, I don't think I've ever had a perfect performance. I've at least messed up one note, and that might have just been a poor articulation or a wrong bowing or it being slightly out of tune. Even my near perfect performances, there was something that could have been better. And I was held accountable with the group. And it's very easy to be one, first or second violinist. I'm a violinist, for those that don't know, to be one first or second violinist in a section of 12. It is very hard to hear those mistakes that I'm making. And yet, we would tout a successful performance, even though I knew I had made some mistakes. When you're recording your part individually, there is no hiding. You're not with a section. When the conductor is listening to you play individually, there is no hiding. And so every nuance and every error was highlighted, and I provided that in feedback to my students, and several of them had commented. They said, this was an intense experience because I'm so used to being in a section and sort of modifying or grafting towards what the section is doing. It's very democratic philosophically, and it's something to be celebrated in terms of ensemble experience. But when you get isolated through the virtual ensemble, it's very different. And so you might have an experience which you can turn in a recording that's subpar, and it could be edited and polished, and that should tell you something about what you produced and the power of editing, right? I mean, that's one thing that could be learned, and maybe that's the goal of what you're trying to teach your students. But conversely, you can hold your students accountable. I warned the students, some of you might not make the final product. If the recording is not at a certain standard, you won't be included in that virtual ensemble because you didn't learn your part, just as much as we would hold someone accountable maybe in a playing test. Now, I think there's controversy surrounding that as well, as if you should prohibit students from a performance experience because they're still making errors and how much you should be supporting them. That's a different conversation, regardless of whether or not you're doing a virtual ensemble. But I would sincerely argue that I had success with my virtual ensemble, and I plan on doing something like that again, because I was able to provide feedback to my students. They were able to demonstrate growth. They were still able to make music. Did they practice as much as they would have if we were meeting in real time? I could undoubtedly say no. I doubt that they were practicing, so we met roughly 3 hours a week. I highly doubt that they were practicing that much, on their own. Is it the same experience as if we were meeting together? Absolutely not. It's a completely different experience when you're with other people in the same room making music. Absolutely, completely different experience. But is there still value in it? And I think that's the question that a lot of people have been afraid to answer. And I want to say with a very loud voice, yes, there is still value in it. There are still things to be learned. And I would rather do something than nothing. I would rather have my students engaged in making music and have a product that represents their collected efforts than not having anything for them to engage with. That's my fear, as was already articulated, of everything disappearing, of everything going away for lack of resources or lack of imagination of what it could look like. Amy, I see that you have 2 posts, and I want to go back and grab them. One was, let me expand this. I had a Google Classroom during the year, interactive classroom with links to make your own music. I had topics that were just for fun, movement, sing-alongs, read-alongs, as interactive listenings, bingo, one classical music and the other musical theater, of course, finger plays, puppets, and then teaching videos and coursework, keeping the classroom open through the summer. And I'm starting a Facebook music page for my school, and we'll be doing live feeds like music crafts and music stories each week through the summer, and it's amazing. Please feel free to share those links here if you want other people to be able to access that outside your district or campus. I would greatly appreciate that. It's amazing that you're doing that. You have another, in agreement with some of the things I said, responded to all students that turned in their work each week, 700 plus students. It's extraordinary. I noticed that me just giving my choir the space to hang out and talk was so helpful, and I'm almost a techie now. It's been a huge growing experience for me. I've even learned to play the ukulele. Brilliant, awesome instrument. Planning ahead if I need to replace recorder in person with the ukulele, and then do recorder on something like Seesaw. Exactly. This is brilliant. Amy, thank you so much for your engagement and the resources and ideas that you're providing. That's huge, especially to educators that are going into the fall quarter and not confident about what they can provide their students and what opportunities are going to exist. It's important for us to be staying connected, collaborating, looking for professional development opportunities and ideas that could work. I think what is difficult to admit is that it's going to be new and it's going to be difficult and it's going to take time. And I'm obviously that can be applied to a lot of different things that we've discussed, but in particular, there are a lot of veteran teachers, and I'm not trying to be accusatory. There are veteran teachers that are used to teaching a certain way and have found success, and now the way of teaching that they are used to is not available anymore. And that is difficult. I mean, I think you need to go through the grieving process in that, because so many people have built their career and found so much success and affected so many students positively through one way of educating, and that's massive. And it's devastating that you can't do that anymore, at least for the time being. But in recognizing that it's not accessible anymore, now we have to do something else. We have to be creative, we have to be imaginative, we have to stay connected and find other ways of engaging our students and providing musical opportunities. So how are you going to do it? I mean, that is the question. How are you going to do it? I would argue now that we have survived several months in the pandemic and that we're finishing an academic year, now there are so many more resources than there were before. There are so many more opportunities to engage students through the arts than there were before. And that needs to be celebrated and it needs to be shared. And we need to encourage more and more people to get connected to those resources, again, through NAFME, the National Association for Music Education, or from whomever is listening. I know it's predominantly music educators, but if you're in other art fields or other disciplines, connect with your national organizations who are vetting a lot of those resources. Connect with university faculty. Connect with colleagues at other grade levels to find out what they're doing. Social media has been a great tool. I've been able to utilize it with these teacher talks to stay connected and just advertise ideas and opportunities. And I would want to say, in the few minutes that we have left, going back to where this conversation began, please do not be afraid to educate your students on the realities of what's happening. I think now more than ever, we need to really fight against sugarcoating things or reducing the impact or significance of events in our students' lives, of silencing their experiences. And we need to invite them to share what it is that they're going through and what they're thinking. We need to focus on social and emotional learning. We need to be very sensitive to the diversity that exists in our public schools and our communities. And we need to invite those conversations into our classroom, into our art classroom. I think in any of the classes that these students are going to, we have the greatest opportunity to bring multiple voices together and for them to appreciate how we can listen to each other, how we can use the listening skills that we already use to experience music, to experience each other's voices, to listen to other people and to hear them, not just listen, to really hear them and understand what it is that they're saying. We are the example. We are the example on our campuses of what it means to listen and hear things that we might not necessarily be familiar with, whether it's a piece of music or it's a YouTube performance, whatever resources you're bringing into your classroom. We need to provide opportunities to listen and talk about those things. Kalima says, how do you speak to elementary age children about current events? There are countless resources, sincerely. There are so many opportunities through social emotional learning websites, SEL websites. I wish I could articulate some of them, but I've been littered with them on my own newsfeed, and I've been sharing them as much as possible. There a lot of the posts that I've made on teachers sort of answering the call to be open and conscious about what's going on in the world. But so much of it is just about talking about crime and how we define crime, to talk about some of the social and cultural heritage that we have, to explore the civil rights movement and to articulate what it was about. You may or may not use particular words. You might not invoke the word of George Floyd. There are so many things that could be triggering for our students, that could be traumatic, and we don't want to do that. But there is an opportunity to talk about differences and how differences can be celebrated. There's so much that exists out there to just talk about these things conceptually. even if it's just conceptually. The blue eye and green eye experiment, which has been done at multiple grade levels. Even if we're just celebrating ethnic diversity and we're inviting students to bring their experiences into the classroom, that in and of itself is going to shed light to what has been segregating us as a country, of pitting Black against white, and recognizing differences as being something that should pull us apart. There are ways to celebrate diversity in our classrooms that will make the larger context of what's happening accessible and allow students to bring that in. Allowing students to have a voice in your classroom, even at the elementary school level, to say, you know, how is everybody doing today? And not shying away from someone saying, I'm scared, you know, and avoiding that conversation. It will be difficult, but the fact is that student is scared. And they could be scared because they're a person of color. They could be scared because a peaceful protest turned into a riot near their house. They could be scared because one of their family members is in law enforcement, and there is, you know, an unfortunate amount of negativity that's been painted broadly against all law enforcement rather than focusing on specific people that are creating crimes. Just as much we are trying to criminalize the idea of protesting injustices by focusing on a limited number of people that turned protests into riots, and not being sensitive to how quickly that can turn and how quickly law enforcement officers can be turned into criminals because they're defending their own life. I mean, these are complicated conversations. They're not simple. And making them complicated in the light of young children, I think, is important, to not reduce it, to not pretend that it's simple. I think that's just one way of just inviting those conversations in that context in. Just simply saying to your students, I am sensitive that all of you are experiencing what's happening in the world in different ways right now. And I want you to know that I care for you and that I am worried for you, and that any of you that need to talk or need support, that I'm here for you, and that what's going on is very complicated and there are lots of different perspectives, and we need to be silent at times and we need to listen, and at other times we need to speak up so that we're heard. I mean, just saying that, just inviting that framework of this is a safe space, this is an opportunity for your voice to be heard, and a place where you need to be able to be heard, that being the school, that this is a place where your voice matters. I think that would do a huge amount for your students that might be experiencing different things at an elementary school level. I can't believe it. As is always, this time goes incredibly fast. Thank you so much to Kalima and Amy, for all of you, and Brian that posted questions, for all of you that were thinking with us and a part of this conversation, whether you posted something or you were just listening. I'm so grateful to everyone that has been supporting these teacher talks. As has been the case, I will upload this video to YouTube and share that link for anyone that might have missed the conversation and wants to join it later. I'm always available to continue conversations that have started here, and I'm always eager to talk with you more about art and education, the possibilities that exist. I want to encourage everyone again to see this as an opportunity to release our imagination, as Maxine Greene would say, to find cracks and openings in the traditions that we've inherited that are promoting injustice in society and our culture at large, and to find those openings so that we can push through them and imagine a new possibility, and to imagine new opportunities for our students and for ourselves. I'm so grateful to all of you, to call you colleagues and friends and peers in this endeavor to educate everyone right now through the arts and the possibilities that exist in doing that, in making art and experiencing art. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I look forward to seeing you next week. If you have any ideas or comments about things that we should be discussing, or people that you would like to see me talking with, I would love to invite those. Feel free to reach out to me through social media. Again, have an incredible Sunday. Please stay safe and stay healthy, and let your voices be heard in platforms that allow you to magnify your response to situations in the world. I look forward to seeing you all next week.